They say betrayal doesn't kill you, it teaches you. I didn't know the lesson would begin with a conversation I was never meant to hear. Jessica and I weren't perfect, but I thought we were happy. We'd been together for 3 years, and in that time, I'd come to believe she was my forever. Sure, we had our ups and downs, every couple does, but I always thought we had each other's backs. When she told me she was pregnant, I swear the world stopped spinning for a moment. My first thought was, this is it. I'm going to be a dad. I hugged her so tightly that she laughed and told me I was squeezing her too hard. She had this glow about her, this light in her eyes that I thought was happiness. Looking back, I realize now that I was probably seeing what I wanted to see. The truth is, I built my life around Jessica. I worked hard, saved every penny, and planned our future down to the smallest detail. If she wanted something, I found a way to make it happen. But looking back, I see now that our relationship was uneven. Jessica was my priority, but I don't think I was hers. I was too caught up in trying to be the perfect husband. I wanted to give her a life she could be proud of. When she told me about the baby, it felt like everything I had worked for was finally coming together. Little did I know, that joy would shatter in a single weekend. One conversation, one moment. That's all it took to turn my life upside down. It started like any other weekend. I dozed off on the couch while watching weekend sports. Life felt peaceful. I was in a good place. I must have been asleep for an hour when faint voices woke me. At first, I didn't pay much attention. It was Jessica and her best friend, chatting in the kitchen. But the conversation sounded low, but serious. I sat up slightly when I heard her say, I don't even know if I should leave him. Leave me? What was she talking about? My heart started racing, but I kept still, holding my breath so they wouldn't hear me. Jessica kept going, her voice low but clear. He's rich, and the baby might be his, but Ryan's so dependable. He'd be a great father, but is that enough? I can't explain what I felt at that moment. It was like the ground beneath me had crumbled. The baby might be his. Who was he? I couldn't wrap my head around it. Jessica's friend muttered something, but I didn't catch it. I wasn't listening anymore. All I could think about was the fact that my wife, my Jessica, was sitting in the next room, deciding whether to leave me for some rich guy. And she wasn't even sure if the baby she was carrying was mine. You know, when you hear something as gut-wrenching as your wife debating whether to leave you for another man, the instinct is to confront her right away. But I stopped myself. Anger clouds judgment. I needed facts, not assumptions. If I was going to confront her, I wanted the full story. Every detail that she won't easily tell you. Looking back, that was probably the smartest decision I ever made. If I'd stormed and then, I wouldn't have had time to think. To plan. For the rest of the conversation, I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loud. I let her talk. And when her friend finally left, I acted like I'd been asleep the whole time. But that's when the waiting game began. That night, as she slept, I sat there with one thought in my mind. I needed answers to my questions. I spotted her phone on the nightstand, and I picked it up and started combing through her messages. There was this one name. He didn't have a photo on his profile, but his messages told me everything I needed to know. Long, flirtatious texts, late-night chats, and the meeting arrangements, specific locations, dates, even little inside jokes that only lovers share. My stomach turned with every word I read. But the one thing missing? There wasn't a single message about the baby. Not one. That's when I realized something that made me laugh. Even in the middle of all that pain. Maybe the guy didn't even know. I knew scrolling through texts wouldn't give me the whole story. I needed to know more about this guy. Who was he? What made him so rich that Jessica was considering throwing away everything we'd built together? So I made a decision. The next day, I contacted a private investigator. Discreet, professional, and worth every penny. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to make him understand I needed answers. And he delivered within 2 weeks. Turns out, Jessica's wealthy man wasn't wealthy at all. He was a glorified caretaker. He lived in his cousin's house, The one his cousin had bought while working abroad. The fancy cars? Registered to his cousin. The luxurious lifestyle? All were funded by his cousin, who sent money from overseas to keep the house running. And my wife? She didn't have a clue. She probably thought she hit the jackpot, falling for some guy who had everything when in reality, he had nothing of his own. I couldn't help but laugh when I got the full report. So, this was the man she was willing to leave me for? A guy who couldn't even afford his own life. All he really owned were Jessica's delusions, and she was ready to throw away our family for them. It was pathetic. I didn't tell Jessica what I knew. I didn't change how I acted around her. If anything, I was sweeter and more attentive. Jessica thought I was naive, the dependable husband who worked hard and never questioned her decisions. What she didn't know was that I could play the fool better than anyone. If she was playing her little game, then I'd play mine too. Only my endgame would leave no room for her to win. After everything I'd discovered, I wasn't just angry. I was calculating. I wanted something that would last, something that would make her regret every choice she'd made. So, I started laying the groundwork. I needed to ensure that if this marriage went up in flames, I wouldn't lose everything I'd worked for. Jessica had no idea I was onto her, and I planned to keep it that way. One evening, as we sat down after dinner, I casually brought up the baby, how excited I was, and how we needed to start preparing for the future. I told her about a conversation I'd had with our financial advisor. Of course, the advisor didn't exist, but Jessica didn't need to know that. I explained that since we were about to have a baby, we should take some bold steps to grow our investments. The thing is, I told her, if we keep the investments split between us, it'll be harder to take risks. But if we consolidate everything under one name, just temporarily, it'll be safer. That way, if anything goes wrong, the risk is limited to one person. I could see her thinking it over, so I added, and of course, once things settle down after the baby's born, we can move everything back. Jessica barely hesitated. She looked at me like I'd just told her the smartest thing in the world. That makes sense, she said, smiling at me, trusting me completely. I was stunned at how easy it was. I wanted to laugh, but I kept my face straight, playing the role of the supportive husband. She didn't ask any questions and didn't consult anyone else. She just nodded and agreed to my plan like it was the most obvious thing to do. That was it. Our joint assets were now entirely under my control. At that moment, I realized just how blind her trust was. I tucked the signed documents away, hiding my satisfaction behind a soft smile. "Thanks, love," I told her. "This will secure our future." And it would, just not in the way she imagined. When the baby was born, everything slowed down. Jessica held him first, her face glowing with pride and joy. She looked at me with a wide smile, and for a moment it almost felt real. Almost. The nurses handed him to me, and I cradled him in my arms, pretending to share in the happiness. But deep down I felt empty. I should have felt the overwhelming love they talk about, the bond that's supposed to hit you the second you hold your child. Instead, all I could think about was how this child wasn't mine. I knew it in my gut, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Later that evening, when we were back home, I brought it up. I asked Jessica, straight to her face, I think we should get a paternity test, just to have everything clear. The change in her expression was immediate. 1 second, she was calm and content. The next, her face went pale, like the blood drained right out of it. She stammered, fumbling over her words. "Why would we need that? You know he's yours, Ryan." "That's ridiculous." Her panic wasn't subtle. It hit me like a flashing red light. She was trying too hard to brush it off, as if the harder she denied it, the more convincing she thought she'd sound. But all it did was confirm what I already knew. I didn't argue. I just nodded and dropped the topic. I didn't need her permission anyway. I had a plan, and this was just another step. A week later, I got the paternity test done secretly. I took the baby's pacifier, carefully wrapped it in a Ziploc bag, and sent it to a lab I'd found online. Jessica had no idea. She went about her day like nothing was wrong, probably thinking she'd dodged a bullet. When the results came in, I confirmed what I already knew. I finally had what I needed to confront her and take control of my life again. That night, I didn't say a word to her. I just lay in bed, wide awake, planning my next move. It was no longer a question of if I'd confront her. It was when and how. You know, people always say revenge is a dish best served cold. And what better way to do it than in front of the people she cared about most? The idea of a dinner party came to me one night. I'll admit I planned it with a lot of care. Not because I wanted to celebrate. Jessica had no idea what was coming, and I intended to keep it that way. She thought it was a celebration of our happy little family. The perfect cover. When the night arrived, the house was spotless, and the dining table was set with our finest dishes. Jessica had even gone all out with the decorations, balloons, flowers, and a cake that said, "Welcome to the world, baby." She was glowing with pride, playing the perfect hostess. Watching her smile, so oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash, was almost amusing. Friends and family arrived, all smiles and congratulations. Her parents hugged her, and her best friend, the same one she had confided in about the affair, was there, pretending like she didn't have a clue. Everyone was in high spirits, talking about how lucky the baby was to have parents like us. I stayed quiet most of the evening, letting Jessica soak in the compliments. It was her night, after all. When dinner was served and everyone was seated, I stood up, raising my glass for a toast. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. Jessica looked up at me with that sweet smile she always used when she thought I was about to say something sentimental. To Jessica, I began, my voice calm and steady. And to the new addition to our family. The room erupted in applause, and Jessica's smile widened. She reached for my hand, but I didn't take it. I cleared my throat, and the room quieted again. But, I continued, letting the word hang in the air, I think it's only fair that we all raise our glasses to the other man in Jessica's life. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Jessica's smile faltered, her eyes darting to me in confusion. I didn't give her a chance to speak. Yes, let's toast to the man who has been such a big part of her life these past months. The man she's been sneaking around with while I was working late. The man who, let's be honest, is the father of her baby. The gasps were audible. Jessica's face went pale, and her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. And while we're at it, I said, my voice still calm but now laced with ice, let's toast to the fact that this rich man she was planning to leave me for isn't rich at all. He's just a caretaker, living in his cousin's house, pretending to be someone he's not. Kind of like Jessica pretending to be a faithful wife. Jessica's tears spilled over, and she stammered, Raya, what are you doing? I cut her off. Everyone here deserves to know the truth. The room was dead silent, except for Jessica's quiet sobs. Her parents looked horrified. Her best friend stared at the floor, and the rest of the guests looked like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. I let the silence stretch, making sure everyone had time to absorb what I'd just said. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I owed her nothing. Without another word, I set my glass down and walked out of the room, leaving Jessica to face the fallout of her betrayal. Behind me, I could hear the whispers and murmurs start to ripple through the crowd, but I didn't turn back. I didn't waste any time. The moment the dinner ended and Jessica's dirty laundry was out in the open for everyone to see, I made my move. I filed for divorce some days later. There was no point dragging things out or giving her time to explain or manipulate me. She'd already shown me exactly who she was. I wasn't just ending the marriage. I was ending everything that tied her to me. I made sure of that. The first step was the custody battle. I wasn't about to let my child, the one we had before this mess, stay with someone who could lie so easily, someone who could choose a stranger over her own family. I hired the best lawyer I could afford. And thanks to all the evidence I had, the texts, the paternity test, and her affair being public knowledge, it wasn't even a fight. The court granted me full custody. Jessica didn't even try to argue. Maybe she knew she didn't stand a chance. Or maybe she was too busy licking her wounds after the public humiliation I'd just handed her. Either way, I walked out of that courtroom with my child, and she walked out empty-handed. But I didn't stop there. Oh no! I wasn't about to let her walk away with a cushy settlement either. Remember the joint assets I convinced her to transfer to me? Those were already gone. During her pregnancy, I'd liquidated everything and moved the money into accounts she had no access to. So when the lawyers talked about splitting assets, there wasn't much left to split. She got a small settlement, a fraction of what she thought she'd walk away with. Not enough to live comfortably, not enough to rebuild her life, and not enough to run off with her lover. Jessica tried to apologize, of course. She begged, cried, and said all the things you'd expect. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen. Can we please work things out?" But by then, her words meant nothing. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Go to him, Jessica. Isn't that what you wanted? You can share his borrowed wealth. Let him take care of you." She didn't say anything after that. Just stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Maybe she thought I'd always be the quiet, forgiving husband who'd let her walk all over me. Maybe she didn't realize I could be this cold. And the truth is, I didn't feel good about it. I wasn't proud of what I'd done. Watching her crumble wasn't satisfying. It was just necessary. She betrayed me, and I gave her exactly what she deserved. In the end, Jessica walked away with nothing. No money, no allies, no excuses. And I walked away free. After everything, I had to ask myself one question: what now? Once the dust settled, I realized it was time to rebuild. Most importantly, for my child, I focused on being the best father I could be. The little moments that once seemed small became the center of my world. And slowly, the pieces of my life started falling into place. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. I was free. As for Jessica, she made her choice, and she's paying the price. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets it all. But honestly, that's not my problem anymore. She made her bed. She chose misery. I chose freedom. But enough about me. I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you have confronted her sooner? Will you play the long game like I did? Or maybe you'd do something completely different? Let me know in the comments, because everyone handles betrayal differently, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've ever been through something like this, just know, life doesn't end after betrayal. It's painful, yes, but it can also be the beginning of something better, if you choose it to be.